and share with me, and I hope to make that a worthwhile choice on your part. So let's get going. Whoop, there we go. I'd like to start a little bit with getting a sense of what brought you here to this session. So if you could jump in the chat feature and respond with whatever you are comfortable sharing to kind of that question of why are you here? What about this topic has drawn you to this session? And what are you hoping to get out of our time together? I'd love to get a sense of where the interest lies, and while folks are typing that, I just want to acknowledge that this session was set up to be a discussion, and so we're going to try to use the chat a good bit to do that, especially given how many folks are here. And while I wait to see some thoughts on why you picked this session in the chat. Thanks, Danielle, for being the first. Appreciate that. So more engaging, more meaningful instructional videos. All right. Video creation, interaction, and use. Okay, we're going to focus a little more on video creation today, I think. Not so much on the interactive side, but we'll see. We'll see how the conversation goes. New to making videos. Okay, this will be a good help with that. First time I had to teach online. Not engaged. Don't think students watch that much. So Nicholas, I think there'll be some things that are good in here for you. Videos central to writing course. Cognitive load. Okay. There's definitely, this is all, what I'm going to talk about is all grounded in cognitive load. New to making video, more intentional. You're looking for advice, video's too long. This is all great. Okay, awesome. If you have some other thoughts about why you're here, feel free to put that in the chat, but I think we'll be able to touch on a lot of this today. And I think we have some very interesting sets of experiences here that we'll be able to draw on. So let's get rolling. This is kind of the general plan for today. I'm going to spend a few minutes up front kind of setting some ground foundational things for us about cognitive theory of multimedia learning, which I like to refer to as CTML. And then we're going to go into 11 design principles that are broken out across the 3 areas of cognitive load: essential, extraneous, and germane. And for some of them, we'll spend a little bit more time talking about them. I'll have a lot of questions for you to help engage around these topics, and we'll try to fill our time. So just for a little bit of background, the genesis of this presentation comes from the work of my doctoral dissertation, which is freely available via the Westchester University Digital Commons. And I will have a link that I think we'll get into the chat here pretty soon that will take you right to it. If you really want to get in the weeds, you're welcome to read it. But what we're going to cover today is a real top level look at some of that. So that I mentioned this already, but the cognitive theory of multimedia learning states that the use of words and pictures together is a more effective way of learning than words alone or pictures alone. And the theory identifies 3 types of cognitive load. The first is extraneous, which is the processing of extra information, which is not related to the learning task at hand. So your goal when you're creating video is to get rid of those elements that are extra that would cause any sort of extraneous cognitive load. Then you have essential, and this is the processing or organizing of information that has to occur in the learner's brain. It really can't be offloaded anywhere else. So your goal as a video creator is to encourage this, is to promote this. And finally, you have germane, which is the sense-making portion of the processing, or in layman's terms, I really look at it as engagement in the learning, and it's a very human component. And you'll see why I say that when we get to those principles, which are at the end, and the ones that I think most of us do very well when we make video. So situated inside the cognitive loads are a set of design principles that, when applied, have been shown in mostly laboratory settings to improve student learning outcomes. And there's 11 here. And we're going to try to touch on each one of those 11 today in our discussion. If I did the math right, that works out to about 4 minutes a principle. So we'll spend a little bit more time on some and a little bit less time on others. I probably also will have more slides than we'll end up using today. So you may find that I'm going to jump past some slides, but all of them will be available on the Discord server when we're done after this. I'm going to go put them there when we're finished. So here's our first principle in the essential cognitive load. And it's one of the questions I get asked a lot as an instructional designer who works with faculty. how long should an instructional video be, right? And that is a question directly related to this idea of segmenting, when the segmenting principle states that it's better to break a multimedia product into user-controlled parts. So when I looked at the research literature, there were some kind of key time buckets that emerged. So first, in an ideal world, you're keeping video to under 3 minutes. However, given that content and education, that's often difficult to do. You often have more content than you can fit in 3 minutes. And so to maximize that relationship between the investment of time it takes to create a video, which can be substantial, and how students tend to view videos, that keeping videos under 6 minutes seems to be that best kind of mark you can use. You can convey a lot in 6 minutes, but it also helps to keep students engaged with your videos. If you do have to take longer, I recommend you really try to hold the line at 15 minutes. And part of the reason for that, I say that, is that Quality Matters has set that as their kind of upper bounds, and they're a very research-oriented organization. But I also ask you to consider TV shows, and you rarely see a segment or a scene that goes longer than that 15-minute mark, for good reason. So with that kind of background out there, I'd like to ask all of you, from your perspectives and the work that you do, what techniques or recommendations do you use with instructors or teachers around this question of video length? Do you want to put some thoughts in the chat? So I see some time limit lengths here. I'm curious too, if somebody wants to come on the microphone, or even say in here, how do you talk about that a little bit with instructors? So I see somebody mentioning micro lectures or videos that focus on a topic as opposed to an entire chapter. There's a great point here from Amy that if an instructor really struggling with shorter, they look to put chapters in, and you can certainly do that in YouTube. There's a way that you can put links in, and I know a lot of the streaming video services have that option. It's something you can do as well. Karen raises a good point there of helping instructors really focus in on the main objective of the video and kind of go down and break it into segments. I'll touch on that idea in a second here. Great question that Julie, I'm assuming you kind of asked that of your instructors. When you watch a video online, how long do you tend to watch? It's a great way of using their own perspective, their own experience. Sadie talks about like how it's easier for students. In video quizzing and breaking into shorter parts, that's a great way to break up something and get some engagement going. Thanks, Linda, for sharing that. Yeah, the data is pretty, Chrissy mentions the data is pretty clear. The 6 minute mark is really your key indicator. You really want to try to stay under that. I keep seeing references to that. In fact, this book I've been reading called Distracted: Why Students Can't Focus and What You Can Do About It by James Lang. He's talking about that 6 minute mark as it relates to students studying. It has nothing to do with video, but it's just one of those examples that I've been finding out there in the world to continues to point to that 6 minute number being a decent marker for you to use. So Lori raised a good point. Like, it's really hard to teach chemistry in 3 minutes, but she's trying to break them up with practice. And she also raised a good point that sometimes there are students that are going to complain if the chunks are too tiny. So this is where I like to point out too that the context you're operating in still matters quite a bit. So Nancy also raises a piece here where it can be really hard to do under 8 to 10. Nancy, I'd be really curious, because I haven't considered ESL students and video watching as a perspective before. That might be a really good research topic for somebody to look into, like, how do students respond in that particular scenario? That would be fascinating to find out. I don't have a good answer for you there. TikTok generation, I've heard that come up. So this is all really great. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to do a discussion. I think there's so much wisdom that sits with us in the collective. All right, so just a little bit of data that came out of my survey of, it was about 55 instructors. about 19% were under that 6-minute mark. Another 42 were in the 6 to 15. And then I had 38% of those instructors were over 15 minutes with the median and the average. And one of the reasons the average is off from the median there is because I had some that were really, really long, like hour long, which just makes me cringe. But two kind of things that came out from talking to some of these instructors is the ones that were good about staying under the time limit were very intentional about chunking, like planning out their chunks ahead of time. But something else that's fascinating is that they set a time limit for themselves before they started recording. So they said, I will make this a 6-minute video. And then they started recording it, and they were often pretty close to that mark that they set for themselves. So that's a very tangible tip you can take back to instructors, is to say, before you start recording, set a time limit for yourself, and then try to hit that. All right, so that's the segmenting principle with some tips and some really great wisdom there. I talked about context a little bit, and especially chemistry as an example. Sometimes you just need a little longer to go over that example, and that's okay. Think of it as like a rule in art. If you're being intentional about breaking the rule for a very specific purpose, it's okay to break the rule. This is one way I like to talk about it with instructors. So if you need to go back past some of those time limits, just being intentional about thinking that through is I think it's okay to do it in that scenario. All right, so let's move on to another principle. I'm probably already off time, but the next principle here is called pre-training. And it's the idea that prior to watching a video or a multimedia product, instructors provide key terms and definitions of concepts before students get engaged with the video. Pre-training is somewhat challenging to investigate because it's not directly related to the video itself. Instead, it concerns the instructional context of a video. When I looked at my data, about 2/3 of my instructors said that they were applying this principle. But when I interviewed a smaller subset, none of that subset were actually doing it. And in a recent presentation I gave, someone highlighted how this is a very easy thing to forget when we're engaged with using video instructionally. So, question for everyone else here to put in the chat: what are some suggestions or techniques to help people who are creating or using video to remember to incorporate this idea of pre-training with their instructional settings? And while everyone's typing in the chat, I'll read some of this that's come in. Pre-quizzing, key terms, challenge questions. Ooh, using some templates that have that idea already pre-built. I love that idea. There's that idea of, here's what I'm going to teach. I'm teaching it. Let me recap. Thanks, Julie. Guided questions in advance. That could be a helpful technique too for folks in there going through the creation process as they're starting to script out their video, to think about, what are the key terms that I want to provide up front? Robert, that's a good idea, like just a list of some technical terms and acronyms. Glossary for prior knowledge. The why, it's always good with the why. Yeah. My understanding of pre-training is that idea of it's trying to offload some of the learning from the video so that students already grasp some of the terms, so that when they get into the video and they're working on how those terms might work with each other, they're not also trying to be like, what does that term mean? What is that definition? One thought I've heard around pre-training is that you put it up front in the video, which was an interesting concept. And I don't know if that actually counts in the context of this principle, but like you start your video by saying, here's some key terms I'm going to define. I'm intrigued to do a little more exploring around that idea. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Again, I appreciate the activity in the chat and would encourage folks to continue to do that. I think I'm going to skip this part, but from my data, these were two kind of themes that impacted how pre-training occurred. But yeah, we're going to blow past that. Let's get to the next principle, modality. This is when words are presented as spoken narration rather than on-screen text. And And anybody want to take a guess in the chat what percentage of instructors reported that their video had audio narration when I did my research with my dissertation? 10% of instructors had audio narration. Thanks, Ann. Anybody else? 100, 25, 90. Wow, we're going back and forth then, back and forth. 85, 80, 100. Okay, now I'm starting. Oh, wait, we went back again. 99. So it was 97. Appreciate those guesses. Most instructors were doing a really good job of using audio narration, but they were also using a lot of on-screen text as well, which is a finding that came up with this next principle, which also moves us into the next cognitive load, and that's the redundancy principle. And this is the idea with a video that when text is presented on the screen, it's only presented on the screen and not read aloud by the narrator. So to say that another way, it's the idea that information is either spoken or presented on the screen, but not both at the same time. Let me give you a little example of that. How many of you like it when the person presenting reads the text on the slide back to the audience? This type of presentation style can feel awkward and uncomfortable. One of the reasons why is that your brain is trying to do two things at once that both use similar processing channels. Yes, I see ugh and preach in the chat. Yeah, correct. You really want to avoid doing that in a video setting. You either want the speak it, narrate it, and then have the captions for those that might need that, closed captions, because there is research that says that the closed captioning is beneficial in that scenario for those that need it. Or you're presenting text on the screen for folks to engage with. And in that scenario, I actually feel like you really need to also be doing something else if you're not speaking it aloud, for the very reason that Karen is mentioning because of some concern about. But the ideal scenario is narrate and don't put text on the screen. Try to avoid text on the screen where possible. And Dan raised a good point, which I'll get to in a second. I just want to highlight one game that's a great example of this principle. If you've never seen this game before, it's great to play with kids. They are, for some reason, way better at it than I am. But this Taco Cat Go Cheese Pizza game is a great example of this principle at work. So I'm curious from all of you, what do you do to encourage your folks that are making video to rely more on visual components and less on words? And I'm going to look at the chat here for a second and check our time. I think we're doing okay. Nancy, hold that thought just a little bit for one of the principles that's coming up, because I think that is a good point, and I will touch on that a little bit. There is some software that won't do captioning, however, so sometimes you do need to have text on screen for accessibility. I would say that there's a lot of options now for generating captions fairly easily. So I'd be curious to like explore that context a little further. You can also provide text-based transcripts of things, which is what Heather just said. Julie's mentioning, again, that idea of templates. I hadn't really thought about templates. I love that idea. Bullet points for key items and add some visual material. There's another comment about captioning. Unlisted video, only people with the link can access it is another way to deal with the captioning. Recording on the go location, Chrissy, I like that. I'm gonna let me play off that a little bit. So here's an example of one that I found from my research. A great way to avoid redundant reading is to utilize this idea of like a field video. This is what one of my interviewees, I'll call him George, this is what he did. When he's out and about and he sees something that he can teach in his class, he pulls out his cell phone and he turns it on and he starts filming himself and he says, here's where I am. And he flips the camera around and he starts pointing at the thing and talks about the thing. And then he flips the camera around and says, well, this is why I talked about it. And he concludes. And what I love about that type of video is there's no words in it. It's very human. It's the instructor. It seems like the instructor's thinking about the class when they're out in the real life. There's just a lot of awesome elements to that. And there's a lot of things in the world that we can use in our video creation. Everybody's got a phone. I think that's one that has a lot of possibility. Yeah, Julie, showcases passion and is great teaching presence. And he cannot violate that principle because he's not using any on-screen text. So my research, 55% of my sample were reading on-screen text and 30% or more of their video. My interviewees kind of pulled out some ideas that why they were a little better about following this principle. One of them was that visual design idea, which we saw with the template example and the George's field example. The other thing too is that my instructors talked about how they got better as they started making more video. They started to get better at using more visuals and less text as they got through the process. But touching on one of the other things too is that some of them felt that they needed to have some keywords up there to talk about because those words were really important. And that gets at another principle, signaling, which we'll get to in a little bit. And I think that touches on what some of the other folks in the chat have been saying, that sometimes you do need to have words up there and have that. I think what I would say from a cognitive theory standpoint is just be very deliberate about how you choose to do that. Okay. Another principle, coherence. The idea of the coherence principle is that you only want to include those elements needed to meet the learning objective in the video and nothing else. So when we think about coherence, it includes the idea of visuals and auditory elements. So, question for the chat. And I'll read it aloud for those of you, even though I shouldn't do that. When does it make sense to use music in instructional videos? If you want to throw some thoughts in the chat there. Most definitely in a music class and when teaching music. Those are very strong examples. Intro ending bumpers with a question mark. Linda, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Chrissy mentions depends on the kind of music. I would agree with that.
Sure. So we have one of our courses, we have videos that get processed by our digital services team, and one of the things that they add are Wharton intro and outro bumpers at sort of the very beginning and end. And I could imagine in those videos using some framing music to open and close the experience, but like not at all during the rest of the video.
Yeah, I think
that topic.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I saw something in here as like a signaling tool. I really love that idea of like, this is important, so we're playing music around it. Dr. Abby there raises some questions about not questions, but the idea of motivation or engagement. I think one of the things that I'm curious of exploring more is if we look at Netflix or kind of the use of video in entertainment settings, the use of music and sound is really used to bring out an emotional experience. And I'm engaged in something with Flower Darby right now where she's talking about how emotions are an important part of learning. And so I'm really curious to see if we can identify where the use of music in instructional video really makes sense to help bring the right emotions and pull out the right mood for learning. However, I think we want to be very careful about using music in videos to make sure that it is being done with intent and not just because, oh, I want to make it sound good. Because then I would be concerned that you're violating this idea of the coherence principle. And some great questions in here, or comments, I should say, about being careful about copyright. And that actually came up in my research a little bit. Some of the instructors were like, I'm not using music because I don't want to have to deal with the copyright considerations. Oh, did I just go mute? I hope not. Okay. I'm still talking.
You're still talking? We hear you.
Okay, good. Worried about that. So there are some exceptions to the use of music, and the music classes is obviously one of them. Just, again, I would say be very intentional about how you choose to go about incorporating music in what you do. And don't add music just for the sake of adding music, because it can be distracting. But there's also a question as to how distracting for those reasons of setting tone and emotion and signaling that we've touched on too. Just so you get a sense, approximately 1 in 4 instructors said they were using extra visuals, and only about 10% of instructors said they were using music some of the time. So that was actually really good from the sample that I looked at. And some of the reasons why they weren't using music included didn't think it was appropriate for the subject they taught, and then that idea of copyright concerns, weren't sure how to do it technically, and that kind of the extra work to add it. It was, for a lot of the folks that I looked at, time was a big concern for video creation. So I would say if you're new to instructional video, don't worry about music right now unless you actually teach music, and then you do have to worry about it. But otherwise, like, put it to the side for now and focus on some of these other principles, and then you can come back to this when I think the research gets a little stronger, a little better about when and where to use it. In terms of visual aspects, being concise in your visuals and making sure there's a real strong connection to that learning objective is important. And one of the ways that instructors kind of focus on that is they're very intentional about editing their videos, and editing could take place in lots of different places, making editing before recording to make sure they're using just a really tight set of slides, or editing afterwards to kind of chop off the beginning and the end of a video, and maybe eliminate some things they felt were extra. And I will say that most of the folks that I interviewed, they used editing to take things away. So again, to kind of shrink it down to get it as coherent and tight to that objective that you want. So as you're making video, consider that as something to do. Consider that editing idea. Another way to kind of help with this coherence principle is to think about formulas. And I talked about that formula with George, but like using a creation formula for yourself, where you say, I'm going to introduce an idea, I'm going to articulate 3 points about it, I'm going to end with a conclusion. That's a very, very common formula we use in writing. And then you had George's formula that I mentioned already. Another formula I use with faculty I'm working with is I encourage them to do 1 sentence of narration for every picture that they want to get. So a picture for every sentence of narration is a rule I use with them. And the goal there is to help my instructors think visually to go along with their narration and their words. So question for the chat here. What formulas or checklist style ideas do you think about using in your video creation process, or that you articulate for your instructors to help them with video creation and in particular coherence? And I see some really great comments in the chat about the use of music and stuff. So thanks, folks. So using the recording tool already incorporated into LMS, Melissa, can you expand on that a little bit in the sense of, is there like a process to that tool that really helps faculty stay focused? Like as I think about something like Flipgrid, you can limit the recording times.
Oh, just because it's easier, and
Okay.
it is easy to edit. That is true. But it's easier, and then it's automatically incorporated into their course shell, and then the students can reply to it.
Okay. So that would be a possibility. Write a script. Okay. Thanks, Chrissy. Storyboards to get them thinking about visuals. Yep, that's that idea I have with that 1 sentence of narration for every visual, every picture. Do practice runs, yeah. Knowing it's okay to re-record until you get it right. This is all good. And those are some other themes that came out when I was talking to faculty. And if you remind me at the end, I can try to remember to share with you a little like cognitive theory of multimedia learning checklist that we use. I'm going to forget between now and the end of the session, but if you remind me, I'll try to remember to share that. Ooh, Dan, I love that. You have like kind of broken it down here. That looks awesome. Good organization with files and names. Thanks, Chrissy. Ruthless editing. Lori, I love that term. That's awesome. Yes, it's it can be very painful to rewatch stuff that we've recorded. I am completely understand that idea. All right. If anybody has anything else, feel free to drop it in, but I'm going to move on to the next principle, which is one I've alluded to already, and it's signaling. So signaling has many forms, including outlining, underlining, color changes, vocal cues, highlighting, cursor movements, finger pointing, and really any other types of change that draws viewer attention to important information in a video. And this is another one of those that I think is not overly difficult for us to do. We just have to remember to do it. That's the part I always am like, oh yeah, I got to remember to signal. So here's some examples of signaling that I found in some videos that were part of my research. You can see the finger pointing example from that field video, but that yellow box, the underlining of that particular term, both some just different actual practical applications. So 52% of my faculty said that they were applying this principle when asked on a yes/no question, but it went up to 76% on a Likert scale question. So that's pretty good. I would say the 76% is a little bit more accurate. So question again for the chat, what are some strategies or ideas that you can use either for yourself or when working with others, if you're an instructional designer, to help them to remember to bring that signaling idea into their work, into their video? Thanks, Chrissy, for the comment about the nice slide. Put yourself in your student's shoes. Use a highlighter tool for the mouse. There was a technique on Windows where you could set, I think it was a control key. When you tap it, it had like a zoom circle that came down on the mouse. So when you were screen recording, you could like double tap that and it would call attention. So that would be a similar idea, I think, too, to what you just said, Amy. I'm not sure if something like that exists in Mac or not. Box and highlight, cursor crazy, color what's important. Don't overuse it. Yes, you have to be, yeah, flashing items you got to be very careful about. Thanks, Robert, for bringing that to this conversation. Yes, Linda, right? I think faculty do this a lot. It's just a function of reminding them or calling that out. There are highlighter tools in screen recording software. I think some of the easiest things to do are the bolding or the pointing. Yeah, Julie reminds us of that color choices and contrast. I like to say if you're going to use color, you should also do something else to the thing, whether that be size change or font, like a bold or italics change as well. Just exactly +1. Yep. I know where that came from, Julie. Boxing was important. Agreed. Yep. Awesome. Awesome. All right. We're going to move on to the next principle. Spatial contiguity is this idea where you want related words and images close together in a video. You don't want them far apart. So here's some examples again from the research. I think the one on the left does a better job where if you look at the first purple blob on the left, the channel protein with the line and the sodium, they're very close to what they're talking about. And then even the text that's underneath each purple blob is very clearly oriented there. Whereas the one on the right, I think that picture is an example of a word wall. And I don't know how well I would say that those things are close together in that sample on the right. So when I looked at how my instructors said they were, from the research, were applying this principle, you can see it was pretty good. 70 plus is not bad. And I didn't have great data from the interviewees about how well they were doing this. So my kind of tip here is if you're using images and text in combination, just keep them close to each other. A cousin of spatial contiguity is the idea of temporal contiguity. And this is images appear at the same time as they're being discussed by the narrator. So let me demonstrate that. As you can see in this graph, with most of the responses pushed towards the right, 75% of instructors self-reported that they were incorporating spoken audio at the same time as related images in more than half of their videos. A very common technique was to show an image or graph and then talk about it, which is exactly what I'm doing here. So if you have an image, and I hope you do, based on what we talked about earlier, when it comes up on the screen, talk about it. And that really will help both with this idea of temporal contiguity, but also the coherence principle. So I already gave you one little hint. I'm just curious if any folks, how they see those two principles connecting with any of the other prior principles that we've discussed thus far. So let's see if I can remember some of them. Coherence, signaling, pre-training, segmenting. Did I say signaling? Modality, did I touch on modality? Choreographed. Oh, Christy, that's a great word to use. I'm not sure what VO is, but oh, voiceover. Is it voiceover? Yeah, okay. Voiceover is a way of signaling. Yes, voiceover is definitely a way of signaling an image. Thanks, Amy. Ooh, Lori, I like that idea. Not sure how to help them, but just off the top of my head, but that idea of helping them come back to slides. I know our tool here at the university I work at, Panopto, captures the text from slides when you record with it. So students can search to find words that are on the slides, even if you don't necessarily speak them. Thanks, Heather, appreciate that. All right, we have, I think, 13 minutes left. Animations, bring them in, but take them away. One other little trick for animations too is sometimes I build like a finished slide first of what I want the final product to look like, and then I make a copy of it and I just delete the thing that I wanted to have come on. So that, and then I go back again and I just keep copying. And that way you have it gives you a lot of slides, but then you don't have to worry about the animation effect. You can just go slide, 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 and it'll just change and evolve as you go. It's one of the ways I try to make it a little easier sometimes on instructors. All right. So we're going to move into the last of the cognitive loads, and we're going to start with embodiment. So I'm very curious, and you can just say yes or no in the chat. If you were given this choice, if let's say you're making a video, would you choose to be in the video you were recording, or just like physically present, they can see you in some way, shape, or form, or would you choose to not be on camera and not be in the video? So yes, I would have my face and my body be in the video in some way, or no, I just want my voice. I don't want them to see me at all. What would you, as an individual choose? It depends, Linda. Thanks for going right down the middle. I saw some yeses, I saw some no. I prefer just voice. Yes, face for a short period to get them to focus. Nope. Most instructors don't want to be on camera. It depends. Lots of faculty prefer voice. Okay, so let me just check here. All right, so from my research that I collected, the percentage of instructors who were physically present in some way, so I mean, some part of them was physically visible, it's for at least some part of the video, it was 49%, it was pretty much half. Which means that was half that was not physically present in some way. And I think we saw relatively close to that here in the yes, no's that came through in the chat. And this is very common, that some people are like, yes, put me on camera. And some people are like, no, don't put me on camera at all. And what I've seen and what this principle says is that we actually do learn a little bit better when there is that human person physically present or visible in some way in the video. And I saw a bit of research not that long ago that said you don't have to actually be in the video the whole time, but if you are on there at least some, it is helpful for the learner. So I've tried very hard to encourage faculty to be on, even for just a little bit, like someone mentioned at the beginning and at the end, and then to go away. And I know some of the tools, for example, I'll reference Panopto again, gives the student the control over what they're looking at. Students can choose to toggle the camera person off and focus on the slides, or have the camera person be bigger because that's what they want to focus on. And I will say too, when you're on camera, it's another opportunity to build that relationship with students, for them to see you as a human being, especially in an online course. They want to see you, and I personally think that's really important. I thought this was a really apt quote from one of my interviewees, so I'll just give you all a second to read that. And this particular person as well said that it did get better with experience, right? She was super uncomfortable at first, but she kept trying it and kind of pushed past it, and she got to a point where it didn't bother anymore. I would say I was the same way with video. So I would encourage you to kind of take that baby step. I will also say that, and I'll highlight this book from Karen Costa, 99 Tips for Creating Simple and Sustainable Educational Video. Karen says that there is probably a subset of the population that just really cannot, absolutely will not be on video. And I trust her a lot on that. So if you find that, like, even after trying it a little bit and trying to be on just a little bit, you've done, I would say, a couple videos and it's just painful, it's okay. You can stop being on for as long as you want. And Chrissy, thanks for that story. I appreciate that, right? I think, and Linda, you bring up a great point as well, that, you know, we've gotten a little bit better about seeing ourselves on camera. Appreciate the comments here. The chat's been flowing really well. I appreciate it. But I would encourage folks to be a video star, right? Star in your video, be a video star. That's the term that I use. 99 tips for creating simple and sustainable educational videos with Karen Costa. I'll try to remember to put it in there in a few minutes. Yeah. All right. Personalization principle is the idea that when the video narrator is talking, they should use a conversational talking style. And 93% of instructors said they were doing this. Pronoun use is a good way to do that. And a tip here too is to think about talking to just a single one of your students when creating a video, right? Think of it as just that, envision that one student that you're talking to and talk to them. Think about it as a conversation. And then our last principle is the idea of voice. And this is the idea that you want to use a natural human voice as opposed to a computerized voice. And 98% of the instructors that I gathered data from were doing this. And just an interesting note on this, I read something recently that as our computer voices get more and more real, we may reach a point in the future where this principle no longer applies in the same way. That the computerized voices have become so real we can't tell the difference, and so this goes away. But for now, try to avoid those computerized voices where possible. Stick to the natural human voice. And a little practical tip there, smiling when you talk, it comes through, even if they can't see you because you don't want to be on camera. So we made it, 11 principles. We got all the way through. I want to just share, since we have a couple minutes, I'll share just a couple other little things here with you. 5 minutes, cool. So I kind of boiled this down to 5 things to help instructors, since 11 can be a lot. The first was be a video star, be in your video. And that QR code is just a little video of me talking about it. The next one is add some signals. Remember to bring in those signals. The third one is the idea of checking your text. Try to cut down on your text, go for more visuals, be very specific about how you're using text. Try not to read your text, so check your text. Account for time. It's that idea of being intentional about setting a time for recording for yourself. But the other aspect about accounting for time too is about being attentive to how much time you have to apply to creating a video as well. And finally, these principles can be applied really with any video creation tools. The people that I interviewed, all 5 of them had a different set of tools and a different process, and yet they were some of the best at applying these principles from the group that I did my research from. So you can do this. You are able to bring these into your settings, no matter the tools that you have with you. Yeah, the group brainstorming was great, Julie. I have made it to the end. If folks have questions, I'd love to take them at this point. I need to, somebody already got 99 in there. So thanks all, I appreciate you being here. I'm happy to take some questions or engage in some comments right now. Whew. Sample checklist, okay. Let me see if I can pull that. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment so I can go grab that so you can see it. Let's see. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Okay. No questions, really? They will be, Julie. I'm gonna do it as soon as I'm done. Yeah, I covered a lot of ground, Laura. No worries. I know I do. All right, great question about managing their time. We are very intentional about walking them through a process when we're trying to train them about like script your ideas, pull your materials together. And we go very slow with that process at first so that they can get comfortable. And then we ask them to go a little faster on another video and then a little faster on another video. And by that point, once we hit 3, they usually, when working with faculty, they've got that rhythm down and they can start to generate on a schedule that's a little bit more effective for them and isn't taking 8 hours to do a video. How do you relate embodiment with redundancy? So embodiment is about make it evergreen. Oh yeah, Julie, that's a great clip. I didn't even mention that. There's so many, that's the problem. So embodiment to me is about being physically present. And because so many folks struggle with me on camera, I'm often encourage folks to be on camera to start, to introduce your topic, and then be off camera while you're doing the main content, and then come back on at the end. And that kind of balances a little bit. And then redundancy is about reading on screen texts oftentimes. So that's just encouraging folks not to have text on the screen that they're reading. So I guess I'm not quite sure, Dwayne, where you're looking for the connection there. If you want to elaborate or come on and talk about that while I keep trying to find my rubric that folks asked for. All right, so for the folks that asked about the rubric, this is what we've done where, and I'll share a version of this with the slides as well, but we took the principle and then we said, you know, here's what to look for. And we just gave them a kind of a fairly mundane scale. And we talk about sometimes it's okay if it didn't happen. And we have the 11 principles are on here, but then we also took some engaging video concepts and put them in the rubric as well. I was giving a presentation recently where someone said, oh, this would be great to use just to evaluate video in general. We've only really used it in our training sessions, but I will make a version of this available with the slides for folks that are interested in taking a look. Just ask that I'll have to put a Creative Commons on it, but just make sure you cite our office when you use it.
Great. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody who's here. Y'all made this session great with your use of the chat. Dwayne, yeah, I would say it's okay to have on-screen text in the presenter on screen. The key with on-screen text is not to read it aloud. That you're narrating something else and the text is being, or if you are reading it aloud, you're being very intentional about the signaling aspect with it. I think that helps. Yeah, Abby, that's the evergreen idea of like being smart about what you include in the video so that it can be used over and over again, not saying like, oh, today in the news, Ukraine. Like if you're still using this video in 2 years, that makes it harder to reuse.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I put the link in for the post. I'll drop it again here for the post-session survey. Thank you again to Thomas. This was really, really great.
They'll be in Discord when I'm done. Amy,
Yep.
I'll put them up when I'm done. I wanted to see how things went before I dropped them in there.
I'll put the link to the Discord in here real quick. So
Okay. I need that too, so I should click on it.
The link for the Discord is there.
Excellent, Audrey. That's part of the goal. It's just when we know better, we do better. It's kind of been my mantra.
I'm going to go ahead and close the room so the next moderator can use it. Thank you again, Thomas.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.